bevy of Daniel Maynard songs, or plethora of Daniel Maynard songs, so you'll be hearing them over the coming months. So this is our final lesson in our Diving Deep into God series, though of course it's not our final time to dive deep into God. We do that all the time. But over the last month, we've been seeking to know God and truth better by exploring both the influence of the overlapping stories passed on to us by family, religion, and social cultural norms, in addition to our beliefs, both conscious and unconscious, and how our current understanding of God, also known as the truth or principle or love, can and does inform various aspects of our litany, creating new experiences that spark even further growth. It's a journey we go on. So we come up with a belief and we take it out into the world, and it works some and it doesn't work some, and it pushes us deeper and it allows us to go back into reflection and deepen our understandings and our beliefs, and the cycle continues. It's all with the intention of raising our awareness and our consciousness so that we can more fully align our daily living, how we show up in the world, how we respond to life, with our highest understanding of God and truth. Meaning, of course, that it's more than an intellectual experience, or even more than a prayerful discernment. But it's actually the true integration of faith-based practices and faith-filled living. We began at the beginning of June by exploring and expanding our thoughts and beliefs around God and truth and justice, realizing our collective belief that justice is an inalienable right comes from our Judeo-Christian roots, which are grounded in social justice values and call us to cease to do evil, learn to do good, seek justice, rescue the oppressed, defend the orphan, plead for the widow, in essence, care for the least of these, and bottom line, to love one another. And we also then recognize how this God-justice connection affects our expectations about how God should and does or doesn't show up in our lives, ultimately reaching a both-and understanding that acknowledges that there are no direct, and by direct intervention I mean sort of random, it would have to be random, so that there are no direct power over interventions in human affairs by a God out there or any force that's out there, but also accepts and knows the constant and consistent presence of a divine order, a divine law, a divine principle. For example, natural law, karma, mind action are names that we give to it, that reflects the infinite power under transforming force of love and underlies the ever-expanding, ever-unfolding, upward progressive movement of life, always calling us to align and embody and express that love in our lives. The following week, we dove deeper into this human tendency to hope for an outside-of-us rescuer, be it God, technology, or a seemingly stronger, superior leader, especially in times of crisis like what we're facing now with climate change. But we also discern through an honest assessment of our Wayshow or Jesus parables that ultimately we are the ones we're waiting for. In essence, we are the potential intervention for justice, love, and loving kindness. And more importantly, what we discern that Jesus' message is that regardless of the outcome of our efforts to be God's love in the world, in this effort, we experience God and we know our oneness. So the calling is for us to do this regardless of whether or not we see an impact that we make. We're called to just show up and be loved regardless. On Father's Day, Linda offered a deep dive into God as Father, providing yet another example of how we can personally come to embody the underlying power of divine love in our lives. Each of these lessons ended with a call for us to realize our own divine nature and claim it, so that we could rise above our human limitations that, let's face it, swing from hopelessness and helplessness to attempts to control all worldly affairs, and live instead according to spiritual principle and divine love, which is never about or dependent on worldly appearances or outcomes. I remember years ago I used to think that we had the power that if we all just held this, we'd see the world change. We'd see the world continue to progress. Well, over the last few years, we've been given sort of counter evidence, which for me has been this opportunity to learn that we act in spite of what the appearances are, that we continue to be God's presence, God's love in the world, regardless of what we're seeing happen out there. It involves doing the daily work of embracing and practicing empathy and compassion towards all beings, which is to embody the pinnacle of our earthly human evolution, which is leading us towards our true spiritual nature. And that, I found, brings new meaning and, or probably better, a new understanding to the challenge in the Gospels attributed to Jesus when he was said to say, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me," from Luke 9:23. That quote in various forms is throughout the Gospels. And it's a good starting place for this morning's deep dive into God that addresses finding God in the midst of change. Change, whether it's like a broken heart that feels like it's been imposed on us, change that we choose, and change that just continues to happen and that we have to adjust to, especially in the endings and beginnings of our lives. But before I dig into that scripture, I want to provide a little background about how my current life experiences and beliefs are inviting this particular focus and offering me this opportunity to find God in the midst of all of it. So it started about 6 months ago when my son Kyle first got engaged. My daughter called me and shared with me that he had expressed a desire to start a family quickly because Mom's getting older. Now, I will admit it took me back a little. Bree said she said to him, "Our mom's healthy and active. You don't have to rush into anything." And of course, I just laughed it off. Well, sort of. Maybe not completely. As I began to do the math and feel our society's messages sort of enter my mind about aging and such. Now, prior to this, I hadn't really thought much about my age in relation to Travis and Kyle having kids. You know, Bree has already had, I have 2 grandsons that are now 11 and 8. But I just knew they would come. I hadn't really thought about it. But he is right. Comparatively, I am older because I was in my late 30s when they were born. And they're now 30 and 31, so do the math. Let's see. So the question is, where do I put my focus? Where do I focus my attention? Then, about a month ago, I attended an end-of-life symposium sponsored by Chunk and the Hospice Foundation. It was an excellent and powerful seminar, and Michelle and I are talking about offering similar workshops and maybe a Sunday series on this topic this fall to help us all do some of the important work of reflection and consideration and planning around this topic, you know, facing death, which most of us are not real comfortable doing. But it didn't escape me that this was yet another reminder of aging and death and another opportunity for me to personally reflect, because I realized I had not done all those preparations that I was being trained to help other people do. So, another reminder. And finally, as I shared last week, when I presented Michelle with her Bible at her ordination ceremony, I had a profound sense of passing the baton, passing the torch. So clearly, change, endings, and beginnings, and most importantly, the unknown, are up for me. And I'm guessing I'm not the only one in the room that's having those kinds of experiences. So it seemed the right topic for this final lesson. In essence, how does our understanding of God and truth and of Jesus' teachings, which are our basic way showers, inform our journeys through change, including the endings and the beginnings and the unknown, the changes that we choose, the changes that seem to be just thrust upon us, and the changes of life that just always continue. I remember the saying that, you know, happy birthday is better than the alternative, right? No matter how old you're getting, it's better than the alternative. Of course, as I reflected back on my life, there's been lots of endings and beginnings. It's not just about getting older that we start to think about these things. There's been lots of deaths and births, chapters ending and new ones beginning. Again, some by my choosing, others seeming totally to be thrust upon me, but all affirming that change is the only constant in life. Now, some 15 years ago, I consciously shifted my life orientation from what I call from manifestation to surrender. From attempting to design my life and affirm my desires into manifestation, which was completely aligned with that, my understanding of the law of mind action at that time, to surrendering my will to God's will, which to me meant trusting that whatever was unfolding in my life was for my greatest growth and therefore my highest good. And that brings us back to our word. If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their crosses daily and follow me. I have to admit, in my early years in Unity, I shied away from this scripture and pretty much every other scripture that talked about the cross. It seemed to be saying that to follow Jesus, we had to suffer and become martyrs. Or at a minimum, give up our desires for our earthly lives, in essence, to deny ourselves and step fully into the unknown in service to God and God's creation, in essence, in service to the world. I sort of preferred the scripture that said it's God's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. I realize now that while I was called to serve God from early in my life, and certainly at this point in my life, I was still into manifestation and using truth to enhance my human adventure, my thoughts about what would be the best unfoldment, my ideas about how to fix the world, change the world, transform people's lives. I was definitely spiritual, but I wasn't fully spiritually mature at the time. The verse that follows clarifies the first one. It says, "For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will save it. What does it profit them if they gain the whole world, but lose or forfeit themselves?" Now, from my spiritual perspective evolved over years, I understand these words to be a clear invitation to fully embrace and be defined by our inherent spiritual nature and values, rather than be driven by earthly or worldly perspectives and concerns. In essence, to deny ourselves is to deny our ego identities that pit us against one another in competition and conflict. To take up our cross is to commit to living truth and love regardless of how the world responds to it, even willing to put our lives on the line. So that doesn't have to be in a real dramatic way of literally being crucified, but all of us experience when we take a stand for the truth that we can get pushback from the world. And so carrying our cross, picking up our cross, is about standing strong in the face of that pushback. Daily emphasizes that this path is to be the focused ground of our living, not a random side effort that we do on Sundays, or we think, well, I do this little bit of charity over here or whatever. All those are good things, but we're being called to live this truth in every aspect of our lives. We don't get to go to work and say, well, this is business, and then try and make up for it or do something alternative that we see as spiritual on the side. We're called to live every aspect of our lives in truth, in the path being the way of Jesus, to follow Jesus. And you've heard me say it over and over again. It's become my mantra. That path is to seek justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with our God, or more simply, to love one another. For me, the cross also symbolizes the multiple crossroads that we encounter in our lives, the change points, like the one that I'm in now, but in truth, we're always at change points in our lives, just sometimes we don't recognize them. Those points are where we choose again and again and again what we value, how we will live, and who we will be. The message isn't about becoming a martyr or being willing to suffer, but rather about rising above our ego-driven human existence of separation and safety and coming back to where we started this morning. In essence, being committed to the daily work of our highest calling and consciousness by embracing and practicing, for example, empathy and compassion towards all beings, including ourselves, which ultimately leads to the realization of our oneness. Of course, this is a journey, not a destination. I always come back to the Richard Bach Book of Illusions. He said, when will I know my lessons are done? Well, if you're still here, they're not, right? So it's a journey that we embark on. But we can support that commitment in practical ways, including being willing to consistently step out of our comfort zones, being open and willing to try new things, new ideas, and new opportunities that increase our connections with one another, especially with those that we don't have connections with yet. You could try something as simple as signing up for our one-on-one here at UMB, which we forgot to put in the announcements, but we're going to draw names next Sunday. And if you go in the back, there's a basket. If you fill out your name and contact information and put it in the basket next Sunday, you do what Larry was talking about, of opportunities to get to know one another better, to get together for coffee or lunch or go to a movie or go for a walk, so that we know each other beyond sitting where most of you are facing this way. And we sort of tend to come in and go out with the folks we already know. This is a way to get to know one another and our backstories and who we truly are better. You can also take a workshop on diversity and inclusivity that helps us recognize where we have blind spots, where we have prejudices that we're not aware of, where we don't understand, because the best way to overcome biases and prejudice is to meet people and be in situations that challenge our assumptions. We can also take lessons to learn something we've always wanted to do, be it cooking or dancing or learning a new language. Stepping out of our comfort zone is a practice that always will result in our higher growth. The second practical thing we can do is face, even embrace, the fears and pains that are always present in every life. Rather than avoiding life's challenges, we can invite them to transform us. Leaning into our pain, practicing vulnerability, and engaging our fears expands our world. Rather than allowing them to shrink our world, when we step into them, we create new boundaries. It allows us to become more courageous vessels of empathy and compassion and faith in God and love and truth, not only in our own lives, but as models for others. We can do that by engaging what we're avoiding. One of the reasons we're going to do this preparation for death workshop is to help us engage that, because to engage it doesn't mean you give into it. In fact, if you're trying to avoid it, it has control over your life, whatever it is that you're afraid of. When we step into it and embrace it, we see that death is just one more chapter in life. And as we embody those things and integrate those things, then we become more fully whole. We can do things like take a public speaking class if public speaking is something you fear. Just think of things that you're afraid of and make a commitment to step into them so that you expand your world. We can also do things like reach out to heal a strained relationship, some connection that we feel is broken and that we just avoid because it's uncomfortable. Life's too short to allow those kinds of breakdowns and woundedness to continue. So reach out to those or practice your own forgiveness and see them in the light. And if necessary, seek out counseling or coaching for issues that you feel have controlled your life that you want to get to the other side of. The third practical thing that is kind of a different aspect, but it's reducing our material attachments. One of the things that keeps us locked into this human world is that we're all about our material physical bodies and the material things that we have in our life. Materialism is probably the most powerful challenge to the spiritual path because it engages our senses and creates enticing distractions and offers the illusion of security and control. Unfortunately, it also pits us against one another with the illusion of the zero-sum game. Whenever it appears that our good is in conflict with another person's, or that we must somehow sacrifice our good to be more forgiving, more generous, more compassionate, or more kind, you can bet that there's money or material things underneath that belief, that situation. In truth, most of us already have more than enough. Happiness research consistently shows that by and large, money buys happiness only for those who lack the basic needs. Once these are covered, more money doesn't buy more happiness unless we use it to help others. So rather than wasting our precious time acquiring more money and stuff, we can experience more fulfillment, more satisfaction by finding ways to give up our time, our talent, and our treasure to help others. The dividends are divine, and I guarantee it. Finally, The fourth practical way that we can step out of our comfort zones, that we can welcome change, that we can find God in the midst of it all, is being, even dwelling in the questions. I acknowledge this runs counter to our primitive wiring. Our animal instincts depend upon avoiding danger, which is defined as the unknown, resolving ambiguity, and trusting what we do know via our senses and our experiences. That's how we're wired in our primitive brains. And I know that well. I was one who always had a plan A, as well as contingency plans B, C, and D. You all know that. I used to run worst case scenarios in my mind to be sure I had all the bases covered and there'd be no surprises. Now somehow that doesn't really fit with mind action, because if you're running worst case scenarios, what are you calling? But I saw it as a way that I could keep control. What's the saying? We plan and the universe laughs. So I'm now committed to entering this new chapter, and every day is a new chapter of every life if we're living it in that open and receptive way. I'm committing myself to dwell in the questions. In essence, to dwell in curiosity and wonder and possibility with my heart open, vulnerable. I'm making plans, but not in cement. Because there's nothing wrong with making plans if we're not attached to the outcome. Plans are what help us step forward and probably find the barrier that says, okay, now you've got another choice to make. But it's good to plan and move. My hands are full right now, but they're not clinging to anything in particular. I'm willing to do what is mine to do and let go when it's time. I'm listening to my heart and for the whisperings of Spirit's guidance, but trusting that I don't need to know the outcome. I don't have to read the end of the book in order to keep stepping forward. I willingly surrender into this process I call life. Now, just to be clear, I'm not saying I've reached my ending here. There's still work for me to do. I'm looking forward to partnering with Michelle over the next years. So I'm not trying to prompt you for getting ready for any major announcement. But I am inviting us all to spend more time in the question, embracing the unknown and the mystery within this human adventure, letting go of our fear, letting go of worldly appearances and concerns, so that we can simply focus on being God's love in action. In essence, seeking justice, loving kindness, and walking humbly with our God. Namaste.
it's comfortable for you to do so. Begin to let go of the outer distractions and begin to gently bring your focus inward. So taking first some slow, deep breaths in, breathing in, slow down, breathing out, let go. Breathing in deeply, slow down. And breathing out, let go. One more time, breathing in deeply, slow down. And breathing out, let go. Right here, right now, we pray. We can stop what we're doing anywhere, anytime, and spend time in quiet contemplation and prayer. So continue with each breath to arrive more fully in the present moment. Right here, right now, we pray. In this quiet place of stillness, we come to know the God of our understanding. We begin to more fully know that presence of love and our own oneness with it. In this place of stillness, we learn how to surrender. Whatever changes you are going through, whatever is currently showing up, unfolding in your life, you can know that it is for your highest good. You don't need to know the outcome. You don't need to know how it's all going to turn out. You only need to surrender. Surrender to this loving presence that we call God. And let it hold you. Let it sustain you. Ask for guidance. And then let go. Surrender into faith. Into that knowing. Relax and allow life to unfold. Knowing that it's all God and therefore it's all good. Despite the outer appearances in the material world, trust that your life is a miracle on course. Allow your life to unfold with ease. I invite you now to spend just a few moments in the silence, fully embracing whatever is showing up right now in your life. Embrace it with love and with faith and with trust in the silence. When I rest in God, I know only good. I know only peace. I know only love. I surrender to the presence of that love and allow my highest good to unfold. And so it is.
One second, just